candles on the table were still burning when my mother looked me dead in the eyes and said, "We've been carrying you your whole life." I had just paid the bill, $412, for a dinner I planned at a restaurant I chose to celebrate a degree I earned. And those were the words she had saved up for the occasion. I want to tell you what I did next. But first, you need to understand how we got there. I grew up in a three-bedroom house in Akron, Ohio, with my parents, my younger sister Pippa, and a very clear understanding of my place in the family. Pippa was the dreamer, the one who got ballet lessons and new school clothes every August, and the window seat on every road trip. I was the responsible one, which, in our house, meant I was the one who handled things. By the time I was 15, I was babysitting every weekend to buy my own clothes. By 16, I had a part-time job at a dry cleaner's 2 bus rides from our house. I handed over $200 a month to my mother without being asked, because she would mention the electric bill or the car insurance in a tone that made asking unnecessary. My father worked inconsistently. He had a knack for getting hired and an equal knack for reasons why the job wasn't a good fit. My mother worked part-time at a dentist's office until Pippa started middle school, and then she stopped, because Pippa needed someone home. I was in high school at the time and got myself home just fine, but that wasn't the point. The point, as far as I ever understood it, was that Pippa needed things and I was capable of helping provide them. I told myself it was normal. Lots of families divide things unevenly for a season. I told myself the season would end. I got a full academic scholarship to Ohio State. My parents came to the acceptance letter moment and my father shook my hand and my mother said, "Well, at least we won't have to worry about tuition." I laughed because I didn't know what else to do. I studied accounting. Practical, I told myself. Stable. I got a work-study placement in the university's finance office and picked up private tutoring gigs for intro economics students on the side. I sent $300 home every month my freshman year, $400 my sophomore year, because my mother called to say my father had been between jobs for a while and Pippa was applying to performing arts programs that had audition fees. I want to be honest with you about something, because the comments on stories like mine always ask the same question: why did you keep doing it? And the real answer is not simple. Part of it was guilt. I had been raised to believe that family meant sacrifice, and that my sacrifice specifically was just the cost of existing in the family I'd been born into. Part of it was hope, the specific, irrational hope that if I gave enough, they would eventually look at me the way they looked at Pippa, with warmth, with something that felt like pride. Part of it was that I didn't fully understand what was happening to me until much later. By my junior year, I had a friend named Constance who I studied with on Thursday nights. She was pre-law, sharp in a way that cut clean. And one night, she watched me transfer money on my phone while we were at the library and said, without judgment, "How long have you been doing that?" I said, "Since freshman year," she said. "Does your family know what a full scholarship covers?" I said, "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "So they know you're doing this on top of covering everything for yourself." And the way she framed it, the plainness of it, made something shift very slightly in my chest. I didn't stop sending money, but I started keeping a log, not for any particular purpose at the time, just to know. I graduated in May, 3.5 years later, magna cum laude, with a job offer already signed from a mid-sized accounting firm in Chicago. My parents and Pippa drove up from Akron for the ceremony. My mother complained about the parking and the heat. My father took photos that were mostly blurry. Pippa was on her phone. I had made a reservation at a place called Larkin and Reed in the short north. It was nice, linen napkins, a wine list, the kind of quiet lighting that makes everyone look a little needed out by life. I had put down my credit card for the reservation. I ordered a bottle of wine for the table. When the bill came, I reached for it without thinking, the way I always had. My mother ordered the halibut. My father ordered a ribeye. Pippa ordered 2 appetizers and a cocktail and barely touched any of it. Afterward, we went back to the parking lot and stood in that particular way families stand when nobody knows who's supposed to say the next thing. I was still warm from the wine, still carrying the small, proud feeling I'd had walking across the stage, and I think I expected something. Not a parade, just something. My mother said, "You know, your father and I have been talking about next steps." I said, "My job starts in 6 weeks. I'm subletting in Chicago through August." She said, "Right, and we were thinking, with you settled and earning, it would make sense for you to increase what you're helping us with. Pippa has her showcase in the fall. The fees are significant." And I stood there in that parking lot holding my graduation folder and thought, of course. I said I'd think about it. I moved to Chicago. I got a one-bedroom apartment in Logan Square with secondhand furniture and a plant I named Gerald and more ambition than I knew what to do with. I liked my job. I was good at it. Within 8 months, I had a small promotion and a slightly bigger paycheck and, for the first time in my adult life, a savings account that was growing instead of draining. I increased what I sent home to $500 a month. Pippa's showcase was important. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself it would slow down after the showcase. It did not slow down after the showcase. My father had some back trouble that required physical therapy. The copays added up. My mother's car needed brake work. Pippa was auditioning in New York and needed a plane ticket. The furnace in the house needed replacing. Each thing was real. Each thing was also a phone call to me. Constance came to visit me in Chicago in the spring, and we sat on my fire escape drinking wine, and I showed her the log I'd kept since junior year. By that point, it was nearly 2 years of records. She scrolled through it in silence for a long time. Then she said, "This is almost $40,000. I said, "I know." She said, "Is the house in your name?" I said, "No." She said, "Are you on any of the accounts?" "No." She looked at me for a moment with that clean, careful look she had. "You know what this is, right?" I knew. I just hadn't let myself say it out loud yet. That summer, Pippa got a callback for a small touring production. It was not a Broadway show. It was a regional tour of a mid-level musical that paid modestly and covered her living expenses. My parents called me the night the offer came in, and my father actually got on the line, which he rarely did, and said, "This is huge for her. She's gonna need startup costs. First month last month, getting set up in a new city." I said, "Dad, the production is covering her housing." He said, "Right, but there's still the deposits, the transportation, getting herself settled." I said I'd think about it. I did not send the money. 3 days later, my mother called and said, "Pippa mentioned you haven't responded." I said I was still thinking. She said, "You've always been the practical one. You know how this works. Not everyone gets the same things in life. Pippa has a gift. You have stability. That's its own kind of blessing." That sentence stayed with me for a while. You have stability. That's its own kind of blessing. The implication being that Pippa's gift was more important than my stability. And could I please fund the difference? I went to therapy that fall, not because of any single conversation, but because of the accumulated weight of all of them. My therapist was a woman named Dr. Voss, who had reading glasses she wore on a chain and a very calm way of letting silence stretch until it became something I had to fill. In our third session, she said, "What do you think you owe your family?" I said, "Everything I've given them, apparently." She said, "That's not what I asked." I sat with that for a few weeks. I flew home for Christmas. Pippa was already there, installed in her old room with the good mattress and a new sound system my parents had bought her as a going-away gift for the tour. I slept in the room that used to be mine, which was now also being used for storage. I moved 2 boxes of old holiday decorations to clear enough space for the air mattress. On Christmas Eve, my mother made a big dinner, and we sat around the table, and there was a moment, between the mashed potatoes and the pie, where my father started talking about the house, about refinancing, about how rates were complicated. And then he looked at me and said, "You're the numbers person. What do you think about us taking out a home equity line?" I said, "To do what?" He said, "Help out a little. Give us some breathing room." I said, "Dad, that's debt against the house. That's not breathing room. That's a loan." He said, "Well, the other option we'd been considering was you co-signing something with us." I put down my fork. I said, I'm not co-signing anything. My mother said, we're not asking for much. And then, in the same breath, without any apparent awareness that these two thoughts contradicted each other, she said, you have no idea how much we've sacrificed for you. I said, I'm going to need you to tell me what you think you've sacrificed. The table got quiet in a way that holiday tables rarely get quiet. My mother said, we raised you, we clothed you, we fed you. I said, I've been sending you money since I was 16 years old. I've sent home close to $45,000 since I started college. The scholarship covered my own costs. Everything I sent was on top of that. Pippa said, that's not that much over 6 years. I looked at my sister. 23 years old, the tour was going fine. She had a paycheck now, modest but real. And she was sitting at a table my parents owned outright, because I'd been helping make their mortgage less stressful for years, telling me $45,000 wasn't that much. I said, you're right, it's not that much, which is why it was so easy for all of you to accept it without once asking if I was okay. Pippa said, God, you always make everything about you. I didn't say anything after that. I helped clear the dishes. I went to bed on the air mattress in the storage room. I lay there in the dark and thought about the log in my phone, Dr. Voss asking what I thought I owed my family, and Constance's face on the fire escape when she'd done the math. I flew back to Chicago the day after Christmas. I did not make any decisions that week. I let myself sit with it. In January, I got a significant raise. I was being moved to a senior analyst role. It was more than I'd expected, and I sat in the parking garage of my office building after the meeting and felt something I can only describe as the ground becoming more solid under me. I called Dr. Voss. I said, I think I know what I want to do. She said, tell me. I said, I want to stop. She said, stop what, specifically? I said, all of it. The money, the availability, the way I arrange my life around what they need from me. I want to stop. She said, what does that look like? I thought about it. I said, I don't think it looks like a big conversation. I think it looks like just stopping and being honest if they ask. She said, that's allowed, you know. You don't owe them an explanation. I know some of you reading this will think I should have had the conversation, and maybe you're right. But here is what I know about my family. Explanations were not things we were equipped to have. My mother had a particular skill for taking any conflict and reframing it until I was the source of all difficulty, and my father would go quiet, and my sister would get tearful, and I would end up apologizing for something I hadn't done. I had watched this happen my entire life. I was not going to do it again. In February, I stopped sending money. I didn't announce it. I just didn't send it. My mother called on the 14th. She said, did you forget? I said, no. She said, is something wrong with your account? I said, my accounts are fine. There was a pause. Then she said, in her careful voice, the one she used when she was deciding how to handle something, we were counting on that. I said, I know, but I'm not going to be able to keep doing it. She said, your father's back has been. I said, Mom. She stopped. I said, I love you, but I'm not able to continue this arrangement. She said, what arrangement? We're your family. I said, I know. And then I said goodbye and I hung up. My father called the next day. He didn't yell. He never yelled. He had this way of sounding deeply disappointed in a register that was somehow worse, like he was grieving a loss that was entirely my fault. He said he thought I had more character than this. He said family didn't abandon family. He said my sister was struggling and I apparently didn't care. I said, Pippa has a job. He said, it barely covers her expenses. I said, then she's in the same position I was at her age. She'll figure it out. He said, you've changed. I said, yeah, Dad, I have. We didn't talk much after that. My mother sent a few texts over the following weeks. They escalated in a way I recognized. First, practical. The furnace filter needs replacing. Just Fia. Then slightly wounded. Just hoping you're doing okay. We don't hear from you much. Then openly guilty. I hope you know how much we've given up for you over the years. I read them all. I responded to some briefly. I did not send any money. In March, Constance came back to Chicago and we celebrated, quietly, with good wine and takeout on my actual couch. Not the second-hand one from year one, the real one I'd bought myself that fall, in a color I chose, from a store I walked into alone. She raised her glass and said, "To Gerald." I said, "Gerald's doing great, actually." She said, "I know, I can tell." In April, I booked a trip to Portugal, solo, 12 days. I had been talking about going to Europe for 4 years, and something had always come up, usually something that cost exactly the amount I would have spent on a plane ticket. I booked it and paid for it and did not tell my family. I went to Lisbon and then to the Alentejo region, and I ate pastéis de nata every single morning and walked streets I'd never walked and sat in small restaurants where no one knew me and felt, for the first time in my life, the specific relief of being completely unavailable. I hiked a stretch of coastline on my 8th day there. It was windy, and the sea was gray-green and enormous, and there was no one else on the trail for almost an hour. And somewhere on that stretch of coast, without planning to, I started crying. Not dramatic crying. Just the quiet kind that comes when something long held finally releases. I thought about the girl who used to transfer money in the library so she wouldn't be noticed. I thought about the air mattress in the storage room. I thought about my father's hand on my shoulder at graduation, proud of himself. I think, for the firmness of the shake. I thought about all the years I had tried to earn something that wasn't for sale, in a transaction I had never agreed to. I let myself feel all of it, and then I kept walking. I came back from Portugal and went back to work and kept living my life. My mother called in June with a proposition. She said she and my father had been talking and they wanted to come to Chicago. They wanted to see my place, see how I was doing. She said they missed me. I thought about it for almost a week. I talked to Dr. Voss about it. In the end, I said yes. Not because I expected anything to be different, but because I wanted to see, with adult eyes, who they actually were. They came in July. I took them to a nice restaurant, not for their sake, or not only, but because I genuinely like nice restaurants now and I can afford them. I chose a place in the West Loop with a very good pasta and a quiet atmosphere. I made the reservation. I paid, not out of habit this time, out of deliberate choice. Because I wanted to and I could. Those are very different things. Dinner was fine, mostly. My father admired the city. My mother said the apartment was smaller than she expected but had good light. Pippa hadn't come. She was back on tour, and without her there the dynamic was different. Less triangulated. But toward the end of the meal, after the plates were cleared, my mother folded her hands on the table and said, "We've been carrying you your whole life, you know, and it feels like you've forgotten that." I set down my wine. I looked at her. Really looked at her. Not flinching away the way I used to, not arranging my face into something accommodating. Just looked. I said, "I have records of every dollar I sent home since I was 19. I have 46 months of transfers totaling almost $50,000. That's not counting what I contributed as a teenager or the times I covered specific expenses when you called. I know exactly what the ledger looks like. Do you?" She blinked. My father started to say something. I said, "I'm not angry. I want you to understand that. I'm genuinely not angry anymore. But I need you to hear me when I say that I'm not going to accept that framing. You didn't carry me. I carried myself. And for a long time, I helped carry you too. That's over now. Not because I don't love you, but because I've decided that love doesn't mean erasing myself." My mother said, "That's a very cold way to talk to your parents." I said, "Maybe. But it's honest." We finished the evening quietly. They drove back to Akron the next morning. My mother hugged me goodbye in a way that was stiff and brief. My father patted my arm. I stood on the sidewalk outside my building after their car disappeared, and I thought, I am 31 years old. I have a career I built, an apartment I chose, a savings account with 6 months of runway, a passport with stamps in it, a plant named Gerald who has been alive for 2 years and is thriving, and one friend who has watched me become more myself every single year. I thought, this is what I was paying for? All those years? Not them. This. The ability to stand here, in the morning air, completely solid. I went back upstairs. I made coffee. I sat in my own kitchen and watched the light come through the windows I'd chosen, and I thought about all the things I used to believe I was supposed to do. And then I just sat there. Quiet. Not waiting for anything. That's the end of the story. Not dramatic. No single door slammed. No one dramatic confrontation that fixed everything. Just a slow and deliberate choosing of myself made over months. Until one morning I woke up and realized the weight was gone. If you've been sending money home since you were a teenager, if you have been the capable one, the stable one, the one who figures it out, I want you to hear this. Capable is not a sentence. Stable is not a sentence. Stable is not the same as available. And at some point, the most loving thing you can do is stop subsidizing the people who taught you that your needs come last. Where are you watching from? I'd love to know. I used to think the hardest part was saying no. It turns out the hardest part is the silence afterward. The weeks where your phone sits there and you wonder if you made the right call. If you were too cold? If you owed them more time or more patience or one more honest conversation they weren't capable of having. But here's what I've learned, and I don't say this lightly. What you repeatedly allow is what you teach people about your limits. Not in a punishing way, not as a strategy, just as a fact. For years, I taught my family that I was available, that my stability was a resource they could draw from, that my silence meant consent. I wasn't wrong to help them. I was wrong to help them at the cost of my own foundation, and then stay silent about the cost. There's a kind of intelligence that school doesn't teach. The intelligence of knowing when a pattern is a pattern. Constance saw it before I did. She sat on my fire escape and did the math and didn't say anything dramatic. She just asked a quiet question and let me sit with it. That's what real clarity looks like sometimes. Not a revelation. Just someone asking the right thing in the right moment, and you finally being still enough to hear it. I think about the version of me who was 19, transferring money in the university library at night so no one would see. That girl wasn't weak. She was doing exactly what she'd been taught. That love meant self-erasure, that being good meant being useful, that her needs were a burden and everyone else's were a priority. She had worked hard to become someone her family could rely on. The tragedy is that she worked so hard she almost forgot to become someone she could rely on too. That's the thing about neglecting your own growth for the sake of keeping the peace. It doesn't keep the peace. It just delays the reckoning. And when the reckoning comes, when you finally show up at a dinner table and say, I know exactly what the ledger looks like, do you? It feels brutal, but only because the truth was overdue. My mother called what I did cold. I think what she was really responding to was the unfamiliarity of me holding my ground. For 31 years, she had known a version of me who adjusted, who smoothed things over, who absorbed the cost so no one else had to feel it. The woman sitting across from her at that restaurant in the West Loop was someone she hadn't met before. I'm not interested in her being afraid of me, but I am interested in her knowing that I'm real, that I have a record, that capable and silent are not the same thing. Pippa will be fine. She has a job, a paycheck, and 2 parents who have always made her their priority. She doesn't need me to step in. She never did. That was always a story my family told to make my participation feel necessary. If there is any through line I can offer you, it is this. Character is not built by what you sacrifice for other people. It is built by what you refuse to sacrifice about yourself. Strength is not endurance. Endurance is just endurance. Strength is knowing the difference between a season and a sentence, and choosing, when you are finally ready, to walk out of the room that was never really yours. Gerald is still alive, by the way, 2 years in, thriving.